the things that I started seeing were just like these lights of like the stars being pulled right down into the ceremony. And I felt that was where my opening or entrance or my sense of direction was being redirected to. I just didn't know what it was. I didn't have a name for it. I didn't know where it was going to come from.
An ancient indigenous prophecy tells of two paths: the eagle of the north, the masculine, and the condor of the south, the feminine. For centuries, the eagle's path dominated, but the prophecy says a time will come when they fly together again. Mind and heart, technology and wisdom, in balance. Many say that time is now. What if the weaving of diversity is the key to the emergence of a new earth? In this series, we explore emergent teachers, healers, leaders, and visionaries stewarding a new paradigm. I'm Romy. Welcome, beloveds, and enjoy.
Nicole Scarab, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so happy to be connecting with you. I think the very first time we connected was around 12 years ago in a very beautiful and synchronistic way. And yeah, I'm so excited to be chatting to you for this series of emergent voices as a healer that has been deeply on your path and has been exploring all kinds of healing modalities for a very long time. So I'd love to start off by asking you a little bit about your story of emergence and what experiences, influences, or forces have shaped your journey to where you are right now.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here, Romy. And I feel that perhaps to begin with, I would need to start at the beginning of the forces that brought me to where I am right now, which would be nature. And so much of my personal journey has been around that, around reconnecting to past life memories where this has been something that I've mastered, and then moving forward, pretty much every single modality that I have encountered that had resonance for me as far as where my soul wanted to be led to or taken to, something to do with that. So I would definitely say nature was the first teacher. Mother Nature, the earth, elements, the beautiful animals in Africa. Growing up in Africa, that was really the start for me, was just a deep love for this planet and for the earth and for all that is organic and just of the physical. Moving on from that, things that went into the unconscious mind. So I had massive interest in understanding what's going on beyond what we could see and beyond what we could hear, so beyond the tangible. And that started when I was a teenager. So I always felt very connected to what people were saying beyond what they were actually sharing through their words. And it feels as well as if, or at least I would say, I think my voice seems to be one of the main components that I work through, a vehicle with which I work through in order to facilitate shifts in consciousness. That seems to be or have been an ongoing theme throughout my life as well. So as far as the emergence, the feeling of wanting to connect to others and actually give them what I could be in service to, as far as shifting consciousness, started when I actually became a songwriter, a singer-songwriter. And so as a teenager, I was interested in yoga, tarot, astrology, all the things. And then in my early 20s, I became a singer-songwriter, and my deep feeling, my heartfelt feeling was to be able to write songs that would support people to think differently. And of course, anyone that knows what the music industry was like in the early 2000s, it's not quite what it is today. And I felt as if I was a little lost with my sensitivity in a space where people had to be very, for want of a better word, very directed and not particularly concerned about how others felt about what they were doing. Sometimes bordering on what I would perceive as not very ethical. But that's just, just where I was at the time. That's what I saw. And so I eventually stepped away from that and looked at other avenues where I would be of service with my voice and also in a way that would support people to shift their consciousness. And hypnotherapy just kind of popped up. And this was before it was a thing. It was before it was commonplace. I was in the UK at the time and looking for something else to do other than the slog of 9 to 5, trying to support a music career in London. And hypnotherapy just seemed like the next leap for me. And then from there, plant medicine entered into my life. And this was back in 2007. So also before it was a thing. And so this connection to other realms began to really evolve from there and emerge from there. And there was a lot of personal healing that needed to happen for me on my journey. So I cannot say that this happened overnight. It was definitely a slow progression. One needs to take into consideration one's conditioning growing up in a very religious household, or perhaps conditioning through ancestral patterns, especially the way that a woman should or shouldn't be or behave, growing up culturally in South Africa, or at least, in a place that was a little more contained and maybe cut off from the world due to political circumstances, and also just incredibly gifted as far as, and blessed as far as connection to nature. And I really do feel like that served in a way as well to give me the gift of being able to connect to energy in a way that perhaps might not be accessible for someone that was living in a first world country where there was so much more access to pop culture. So, yeah, I would say that that's kind of how everything emerged. Has that answered your question sufficiently?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my next question is, could you tell us a little bit how your spiritual journey unfolded from there, into your various modalities and the things that you have studied?
So, I would say the spiritual journey began very much with the introduction of plant medicine. When I started with the hypnotherapy, I went out and I sorted the best option that I could find because there were so many certificates. There was nothing really recognized. People were doing a lot of past life regression, which was not recognized by psychotherapy or psychology at all. And I'm speaking back in 2005, 2006.
Okay.
So still
Yeah.
considered a little fluffy as a practice. And my spiritual sense was more connected to being able to harness my own psychic gifts. And that was something that was of interest to me, but it was more in terms of understanding and getting connected and wanting to be intuitively sharp. And I would say that that's because that was more of a protective mechanism than a spiritual practice. There was a connection to the earth and energies of the earth, was kind of nature based, I would say, in my early 20s. But that really came to fruition with the plant medicine because then I had a language and I had almost like a vocabulary and a system and a structure that was already set up, but really ancient, which really resonated for me. And it felt much older and much bigger in its picture compared to perhaps what I'd grown up with, which was a very strong Jehovah's Witness family, with the beliefs and the conditioning and the concepts about reality there. And I'd always known that there was a bigger picture, but I just couldn't really put my finger on it. And so when plant medicine showed up, there was a big opening, I would say. And for some, that's what's necessary for them. For others, they don't really need to take that path to awaken in that way. However, I would say that that was just the start. It was almost like an entryway. It was a doorway. However, the real work was done in between everything, which was filtering through the immense amount of post-traumatic stress, ongoing post-traumatic stress, CPTSD, you know, really coming to terms with overcoming the fear of doing something different that my family had become accustomed to and what they expected. I think that was really a lot of what I had to go through when I first entered plant medicine. I don't know if you know what Jehovah's Witnesses are like, or maybe very strong Christian families, but anything to do with that sort of stuff is demonic. And so overcoming my own internal judgment around it, around myself and my fear of where I was heading, and what was actually happening and the kinds of connections that I was having to the spirit world in that way. So there was a lot to clear. And then on top of that, there was a lot of familial stuff and ancestral stuff and relationships that were almost reflections of the low self-worth and the pain that I had internalized, which is something that I think a lot of women can relate to.
Yep.
So the spiritual path was doing the work in between to begin with. However, there wasn't so much a connection to a specific set of rituals that came later. The time when I first entered plant medicine, it was more that connection to what was outside of this tangible reality. And it was very much connecting to everything else, which was perhaps at that time considered enough. And really, through the journey, I've come to realize that what helps to integrate all of that massive connection and psychic ability is the rituals and the ceremony that happens in the 3D. There is such an importance, I would say, there to have that sort of devotion to a spiritual practice where you come back over and over again. And so to begin with, I was trying everything. I went into Kundalini yoga. I became a teacher in that practice and in that lineage. I went to Vipassana. I tried other kinds of transcendental meditation. I tried other sorts of approaches to altered states of consciousness, breath work, and the Jungian archetype stuff. It actually started much earlier than that. And it was just a point of interest for me to understand psyche better. But the real work, I would say, was in the everyday cutting wood and carrying water. And it's that burning, it's what they call, what is spoken of in the psychotherapeutic practice called process-oriented psychology. They speak about an internal burning that needs to happen. It's almost like you burn your wood. And that really was, I feel, where the greatest spiritual awakening and development happened, was through the internal work, not so much the psychedelic acrobatic, beautiful experiences that I had out there.
Yeah, it feels like sometimes those experiences can open a door for us and even give us a new perspectives. And of course, there's healing that can happen in that. But really, so how do we weave those perspectives into our everyday? And like you say, that internal work of accepting and navigating the real world, but from a more equanimous internal state, a state where an acceptance of that we're going to go through pain and we're going to go through these things, but go through them with more beauty and grace and understanding. I guess for me that has been a big part of my integration.
Yes, indeed. Something else that I would add as well is that when it comes to the devotion to a spiritual practice, anything I find now that connects back to the heart is pretty much the way forward. So what I've noticed over the years, and it's started particularly with the opening of going into plant medicine and eventually becoming a facilitator and traveling all over the world, doing those retreats and building community in that way, was that it doesn't take much to get people tapped into their psychic gifts. And it doesn't take very much for people to start gaining a lot of spiritual power. In Vedanta, there are sacred scriptures where they speak about how even the asuras, which in Judeo-Christian terminology we consider demons, but they're really just almost supernatural beings that function from ego and not through divine will. They can also acquire spiritual gifts and boons through their strong discipline and their meditation and their what they call tapas, which is that inner burning. It's almost like they can also acquire all of these gifts as well. Spirit is not going to say, okay, you can have them, you can't have them because you're bad and you're good. Anyone is able to have a spiritual practice and acquire these gifts and acquire this spiritual strength and power. It's just what people do with it and what beings do with it that makes the difference. And
Complete.
Where that leads to then is it's not just about the power and the gifts and having that connection. It's also about having the softness of the heart and the wisdom and the inner peace that it takes to be able to hold all of that power. And that's something that I have Yeah, I've really, really noticed, especially over the last few years, has become apparent as an important piece of growth, an important direction for growth for many.
Yes, I love that. That's so beautiful. And so now you are working with transference healing. This is a very big part of your work. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what it is?
Yes, I'd love to. So, transference healing is a modality that I really do feel like my higher self was calling in. I had come to the point where I deep down knew, this was about in 2019, I deep down knew that I needed to make a step away from plant medicine. I felt like there was a lot that I passed through. I'd been going backwards and forwards between the States and Peru. I was facilitating quite a lot of ceremonies, mostly underground, but in sometimes in countries where it was considered decriminalized as well. And I was getting to the point of realizing it was actually quite taxing on my physical body. As a woman at a certain age, having a lot of late nights for hormones and hormone balance, it's that medicine can be quite intense. And going and doing the ancestral dietas in isolation in the jungle for long periods of time with not enough nutrition is a very ascetic practice, and it's very much based on the masculine body. And I
Yes.
know that, there's been a trend recently of people speaking about how a lot of the systems have been set up have actually been for masculine or male bodies and not so much for a woman's body. And traditionally, people facilitating plant medicine, if they were women, would need to be past their childbearing years. They would have to be in their menopause or past menopause even, because then they could actually hold the energy of it a little more easily. And so
Yeah.
I did start feeling the wearing on my physical being and my welfare, even though I had a very good reputation for being a safe female facilitator. Um, I started feeling the need to move away from it. And so it started kind of in 2019. I was in Peru with a very beautiful teacher doing some deeper learning around the plant medicine of Wachuma, the cactus, and beautiful plant spirit. And I was really doing a lot of soul searching, and I was in Urubamba, which is in the Sacred Valley, just outside of Cusco. And I just had this really incredible experience one night with my teacher, and it was the start of what was going to become. It was the emergence of what was going to become what I've moved into now. And from there, I just started feeling very connected to the stars. It felt as if I needed to be drawing more of my understanding and awareness and healing energy, not so much from Earth, maybe a little from the Earth, but I needed to be looking elsewhere for the light. It was almost like there was a light that needed to start coming in. And from there on, it kind of unfolded into early 2020 when I went on, I did a dieta with one of my teachers, Manuela, and Manuela Mauas, and so their family specializes in the tree Noya Rao, and it's a very specific kind of dieta, which some people are not sure actually whether the tree actually exists, whether it's actually just an etheric aspect of the plant spirit, which what I've understood from transference healing is actually very, very likely as well, and that would keep it protected. So it exists in other realms, and it comes
Oh, wow.
through the beings, through the beings that actually are resonant with that kind of light. And it is very, very high frequency and very, very light based. And there was actually quite a trend at the time for people being very drawn to this tree. There were a lot of people being drawn to this dieta. And I went and I did a dieta for a few weeks in the jungle, but I was very isolated. Like I really, really went out of my way to not speak to anyone. I went out of my way to be very, very in my own space. And I was eating one meal a day and very bland food. And, you just really get very, very thin and emaciated, but you're just, living with the mosquitoes, naming the cockroaches, and, just living in a little hut in the jungle and getting comfortable with wild animals walking around you at night, and you don't know what they are really. And you don't know what spirits might they be either. And while I was on that dieta, I started really getting into the Shipibo language. And I started speaking the Shipibo language more frequently and, just to myself and in my dreams. And then in ceremony, I started singing, because I mean, I obviously had like a little dictionary, so I was kind of putting things together, but it started to kind of flow a lot more easily for me. And it was during that dieta that I really went deep with connecting to the energy of that language, which I don't think is often spoken about by people. I don't think people understand the beauty of that culture or how powerful and potent the language and the sound of it is. And what I started calling in, and I don't even know how this happened, but it was one of the head students of my teacher. He actually lived there and he was married into the family. So he'd really made a very big commitment to this. This was his life. He was a linguist and just a wonderful man. And he gave me some unusual, obscure words in Shipibo, which were related to starlight and the heart. And for some reason, that just resonated so deeply for me. And I started singing this in my Icaros. And the things that I started seeing in ceremony were just like these lights of like the stars being pulled right down into the ceremony. Even my teacher, she was just like, like a pause, because it's not necessarily the done thing that I know of. There are pillars of light they call in directions, they call in the connection to the plant spirits and to God for sure. But the wisdom of the stars and starlight, I've not encountered that. And that was, I feel, the start of something new coming in for me. And I felt like that was where my opening or entrance or my sense of direction was being redirected to transference healing energy. I just didn't know what it was. I didn't have a name for it. I didn't know where it was going to come from. And then there was obviously COVID, and I got back, literally, I somehow had got back into the States as the borders closed. Like, I don't know. Otherwise I would have had to stay there in the jungle on dieta, which wouldn't have been too bad, I guess. But, still, I managed to make it back. I was still in isolation, which was interesting. So I had the opportunity to actually really stay within myself and sit with that energy. And then I started really working with the concepts of the goddess. For some reason, that was coming through very strongly as well. And the energy of Isis, and which had come through in Peru when I was in the mountains, at that Wachuma ceremony that I told you about, where I was kind of starting to get this, there was something else coming, and Isis was really present. And then, I during 2020, I found Transference Healing through somebody who was doing some sort of online, container where she was running a group healing on everyone. And this was this Transference Healing thing. And she did almost like a guided meditation for us and had run a healing on us just before this happened. And the downloads I received during that guided meditation were more than anything I'd ever experienced anywhere else. And I thought, this is almost like plant medicine. I thought this is almost as potent, but also I was more able to integrate it into my everyday life because it wasn't so blast me out of my physical reality and knock my teeth out, that punch that the DMT give you, and everyone knows that is done it at least. I was just like, wow, what is this healing modality that you're using? Like, what is this? And she didn't mention it so much to begin with, but eventually we got it out of her that it was transference healing. So I was like online, like, how can I find this transference healing thing? And I found somebody else that was doing it. And then eventually she mentioned her teacher, who was the anchor of transference healing. I was just like, who is this person? Her name's Alexis Cartwright. I was just like, oh my gosh. And I found her, that ascended master up there, that one. That man in purple holding the cup.
Wow. Yes,
I
yes.
saw that on the website, and I saw that picture, and I thought, I know that being. I don't know who that is, but I know who that is, and I have to go there. I don't know what it is, but I've got to go there. Under the picture, there was a little explanation of what this ascended master. So I'd never been into ascended masters. I never really had gone that deeply into what the ascended masters were. Of massive interest to me. And then suddenly that one, I was just like, who is that? And it said he oversees the mystery schools, the Transference Healing mystery schools. And his name is Lord Melchizedek. Wow. And I was just like, I don't even have to know anything else. I'm going to those mystery schools. How do I get to those mystery schools? That's where I've got to go. That's my path. I knew immediately. It was just by looking at the picture. And it sounds kind of crazy, but I mean, it's how it worked out.
Amazing.
then I found out, oh no, okay, the only way that I could get into attending the mystery schools was to do all the trainings in transference healing. Now, at this point, I'd done so many healing modalities, I was like, oh no, not another energy healing, modality. And as you know, I'd completed a master's degree in psychiatry. It was just like a lot on my plate at the time. And I thought, oh my gosh, do I really want to do another training? And it was just that picture. And I thought, I've just got to do this. So I signed up for all of the trainings. The next set of them was going to happen online in February 2021. I was like, right, that's where I'm going. I'm doing this. And that was November 2020. And so what, like 4 years ago now? That's how quickly the whole journey has unfolded. And then I did all the trainings, signed up for the first mystery school, and my life literally got turned upside down and it exploded into smithereens. Everything
Sure.
disappeared. Like my marriage dissolved, my home disappeared, everything just disappeared, and all that was left was the path.
Wow.
And that was it. All that was left
You're
was the
doing
path to
now.
him. Yeah. And everything that would have prevented me from it disappeared. And that included the plant medicine. I had to make some very big decisions around what was more important to me. And I felt like holding that kind of frequency, which is what I encountered with transference healing, which I have to say covers so much of pretty much everything I've dedicated my entire life to, as far as, or at least my professional life to. It covers so much of it. It was fascinating for me to delve into a healing modality that just was so concise and yet complex and yet also eternal. It's backwards and forwards and multidimensional and parallel realities and vastly future potentialities and everything that could possibly have been in the past. It just covered so much. And I guess also it was meeting me at a level I was ready to be met at, because that was what I wanted. Really wanted the mystery. It was so important to me. And that's what I got. And, he was my companion for a lot of that time on that journey. He still is. He's still in the war here. He's still with me in India. Yeah. So that's how I kind of got into the transference healing modality. And as I went deeper into it, and I started getting more into the mystery schools, which is the deeper esoteric understanding behind the transference healing modality. So you can do all the trainings and you don't have to go to the mystery schools. You can do the trainings of the healing modality itself and become a transference healer and be running that energy, beautifully, and be an incredibly beautiful healer. However, if you have a thirst for knowledge and a thirst for delving more deeply, which I can't help myself, it's just a path for me, then, you go into those mystery schools. But the deeper you get into the mystery schools, the more you need to start making hard decisions, like really important decisions. And one of them for me was realizing, okay, there's all of this energy, there's all of this stuff that goes on in the astrals of plant medicine. Is that something that I am willing to be a part of still? And at that point as well, there was a lot of social justice happening, the kind of the wave of social justice and cultural appropriation that was happening. We were being made more aware of it in the States. And this was 2018, 2019. I think that somehow informed my choice as well of wanting to find something that was a little more universal, a little more connected to my own soul lineage. And, just something that I could apply to pretty much any situation or person. And there's a lot of free will involved. It wasn't, because that's transference healing they do work according to a lot of free will, whereas some of the other healing modalities, there wasn't quite so much of that. There were a lot of permissions that needed to be asked. And then there's, just the absolute beauty of the opportunities for growth and spiritual growth that have happened, not only for me, but for those that touch the energy. So that's why I feel like that's the only modality that I really want to work with moving forward, because it is just so deep and so powerful and potent. And it's helped me to open up and access so much more of myself than I ever thought possible.
That's so beautiful. And it sounds like it kind of encompasses all the things that you've already studied and learned. I mean, all of those things kind of would play into your work anyway.
The previous modalities that I have had experience with, I occasionally still delve into when I do my one-on-one mentorship with people. So there is mentoring work that I do with people. very much connected to the elements. There's certain aspects of shamanism brought in. There's certain aspects of hypnotherapy, the process-oriented psychotherapy as well, which is opening up a process within the unconscious mind, working with dream figures, working with archetypes. It all kind of plays into what I'm doing right now. The family constellation is massive. You know, it's very, very closely associated to parts work and internal family systems, all the things that you know, I've been working with and utilizing with my clients through one-on-one sessions to help them to better understand themselves at times when perhaps they weren't able to find purchase because maybe the experiences were so big. You know, I used to help people with psychedelic integration, you know, so helping them to kind of bring it back to what was going on internally without the medicine happening, you know, and the psychedelic experience. And what I've noticed is that I did go through a phase of grieving, of thinking, wow, everything that I've done has just been for nothing. Like, you know, what did I put all of that energy and intention into? All of those things. Why was I being guided down that path to do this degree that was just turned me inside out? You know, I mean, to have to think like a doctor and in the medical system, there's no cure for anything. It's just masking symptoms, managing symptoms, getting people back on the hamster wheel. Like that's really what it's about. It's not even necessarily about really helping people to integrate life and these
No.
experiences. Yes, you can refer them on to CBT or to, you know, some other, you know, form of support, you know, maybe counseling or whatever. You know, psychiatry itself is not what people always thought it was, which was people sitting on the couch talking. It may be for some, but it's not so much anymore, you know. And yeah, it was kind of sad for me to go into that and see that. So anyway, I kind of wondered to myself, wow, why did I do that? Like, why on earth did spirit take me there? And slowly but surely, all the pieces are starting to come together, and I'm starting to get more clients that are actually having these spiritual breakthroughs that may be read more by the medical system as breakdowns, when really where we are heading into is a time when more and more people are going to be having these spiritual awakenings, and it will be seen as them being mentally unstable, them having these massive psychotic breaks, these, you know, breaks from reality. And essentially, I would never say to somebody, don't go and see a doctor or don't seek medical help, you know, always, especially when there's an ethos of non-harm. You know, I always work with that sense of do no harm, you know, and there's, you know, what is harmful, what is non-harmful. Let's go for the most peaceful, loving, most compassionate route. So if somebody needs medical care, absolutely, yes, let's do that. However, there is also the sense of being able to understand things multidimensionally and to understand, okay, so the soul, the higher self, something is breaking through here. Something is opening up for you. It may seem like it's everything, everywhere, all at once, which is overwhelming for the current 3D psychology of the person, and they're trying to grasp it, but it's just not equating right now. And it will eventually, but it might look like somebody having this massive episode. And, you know, this has happened in the past, and maybe in some other cultural contexts, maybe in more indigenous contexts, this kind of experience was given space within the community. And people were able to reintegrate back into the communities in a healthier way. And they found that they could find a place. Whereas in our mainstream society now, it's so taboo, and it's considered something that is to be, people like that are extricated from society. They're pushed away. They're considered nuts or crazy, or they can't be one of us because we can't, you know, we don't know where to put them, kind of idea. And so, yeah, I do feel like a lot of the modalities that I've worked with before are informing what I do now. The family constellations, big time, definitely. Anything to do with internal family systems, parts work, hypnotherapy, taking people to guided meditations, internal journeys, you know, to find answers, a lot of somatic work, trauma-informed coaching and somatic work. You know, all of those things where I've dipped my fingers in are now coming together to become part of something bigger that I'm able to offer through my one-on-one sessions. And so what I've started doing is combining the transference healing to open people up to what more is possible and what potential there is for them and what their higher self is wanting to bring through for them at this time. And then being able to do the one-on-one work with them in between as a form of mentorship, support, whatever it is that they need. Some people only need the healings, and then they're quite, you know, they're quite good in between. Others need a little more support, and I'm able to offer them that. So I I'm really in this beautiful space right now of honoring the journey that has gone and being able to have faith and trust that those things are coming together to create a very beautiful healing space, which is what I call the 12th house healer, which is everything everywhere all at once. It's like that astrological phenomenon of every past life, every future life, every potential archetype that rests in that space of the unconscious, and what we have the capacity to connect to. Speaking to the theme of the Aquarian age, I really do feel like we are moving into a time now where we are needing to embrace our individuality and not be doing things according to what we've always been told to do. However, and staying true to integrity and ethics and kindness, compassion, understanding of others, all that sort of stuff, all that kind of that Aquarian energy, and yet also standing and working towards a collective goal, which is a world filled with healthy, happy, peaceful people that are all living at a level of a quality of life that is, giving them all the essentials that they need: education, water, clean food, homes to live in, all of those kinds of things, and to have a happy, healthy community where they can thrive and have their own gifts be birthed through whatever activities are accessible in that part of the world. So from what I've seen, and this is just my experiences in India, there's a beautiful community initiative that my spiritual teacher has here with the school, where there are a lot of kids that are coming and their families have been illiterate for pretty much every generation up until these children being brought to school. So this is a very poor area of India. It's communities of farmers, and a lot of them have had generations of just literally subsistence farming, living off the land. And I tell you, these kids are so incredibly bright. They come to school and they are so eager to learn. And it's so touching to see. So I know it makes me a little emotional, but they're so bright, smart, and well spoken and polite and well read for their age, and their level of English language is so good. It's actually very beautiful to see. And so that is just such a clear indicator that there are children out there, if they were given the opportunity, to make such a big difference.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you for sharing that. A couple of things came up while you were speaking. A big part of emergence is about integrating our personal emergence with the collective emergence, and that feels important, that we start building a new world together in coherence with one another, because we have been so separate and divided. And when you were talking, especially when you were talking about the psychiatry and masking symptoms to get people back on the hamster wheel, that quote came up for me: it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a sick society. And I think this is this kind of window of time, of awakening, of reorienting that we're in right now, is to kind of look at the old psychiatric model, or even the psychological, but not everything is psychological. And that's kind of where you're at this intersection of so many dimensions. You're grounded in this world because you have the knowledge of it, but you also have the vision of the big picture, the all, everything everywhere all at once, and how everything interconnects. And I feel that's what is emergent, and that is what is necessary in this time, in order to move away from that old sort of reductionist model and unconscious model of healthcare, which isn't really, into a new paradigm where each person is a whole person and a whole being, even beyond their personhood. That's how I see you shifting perspectives right now in this time. From your perspective, how do you feel your approach is maybe pushing boundaries or experimenting with new paradigms?
I would say that with the transference healing, that feels as though that's the doorway, the main doorway. From the understanding that I've gained through that particular healing modality, and it sort of started with the plant medicine, because there's an understanding that, psychosis, schizophrenia is more of a spiritual situation, not so much an illness, but it's a process, a spiritual process that someone's going through. And I feel that moving into transference healing, it enabled me to actually have more tools with which to support people that were having these spiritual awakenings in a way that perhaps the modern system might not be able to cope with or is not coping with. I also feel like the system needs more people thinking laterally in terms of really looking beyond what all systems have perhaps created in the past, that were a structure that we used as springboards for where we are now, which is great. And I would not discount allopathic medicine and psychiatry, which was important at the time. It was just a reflection of our development and evolution at the time. But since 1999 and going into the 2000s and then 2012 and now 2020, there have been some massive leaps in our energetic evolution, our spiritual evolution as a species, as well as in our technological advancements. And all of that is not necessarily equating into how our nervous system is coping. If that makes sense, it's almost like our nervous systems need to be brought up to speed. And what I love about the healing modality that I'm working with now, Transference, is that it really works on 4 different planes. It works on the physiological plane, it works on the emotional, on the mental, and on the spiritual plane. So people are being given opportunities to have their neurological system supported in ways that are quite directed, because there are certain generic protocols that go through that work with the nervous system, the central nervous system, as well as DNA activations that can be done frequently. So every time we have a transference healing, you will experience some sort of healing that goes into where it is required within your DNA lineage, depending on what is surfacing at the time. Whatever you're ready for in that moment. Bear in mind that everyone is going to be at a different level. Not everyone can be held to a specific bar or a specific level of readiness on their path of growth. And so I know I've heard some spiritual teachers speak about it being different waves. Dolores Cannon used to speak about that as well, different waves of consciousness, and they'll be the first waves of consciousness. And I feel like they've already, they've been present on the planet for a while. And they've been kind of the pioneers and the way showers. And I really do feel like the channel for transference healing is, definitely one of them. She was working with this modality, many years ago and channeled it in. And I personally feel like it's so perfect the way that it's been brought through. It's really, awesome. And I have to say that because I've tried a lot of other things, and I feel like it's just really a phenomenal modality. However, it works with people where they're at. And I feel like that's the most important thing. Like there are some people, say for instance, just as an example, no judgment, but an observation with plant medicine. Some people come in and they're so not ready for that experience. They might think that they are, they might want to be, but they're not. And that leads to a lot of pain and suffering. And that's from having been a facilitator for the time that I was, watching people not doing the work before to prepare and not doing the work after to integrate and not doing the work in between each ceremony, but just coming back and wanting to reconnect to that space without integrating and digesting the messages that they received. And even not even necessarily the messages, but just everything that happened, everything that they went through. It's almost like living another lifetime in that period of time. And you actually need to, sit with it. And for some people, that can take a whole lifetime, like a whole, set of years to actually like really embody it fully. And so and I speak from experience. Like I like to speed ahead more than the most. I can be pretty maverick, and I have been in the past. So I know what I'm speaking about. I know what I'm talking about here. And I would say that's what I often say to my clients: don't make the mistakes I did. Like don't do it like I did it, because rather take my advice, do it rather this way, because it'll be a little easier and a little gentler, and you'll come out a little less fried. So because I can do that. Manifesting generators tend to do that. There's like, to the very edge, and then they have to work their way back and pick the pieces up. Like, oh yeah, I missed all of these steps. I would say, you know what I'm talking about. So
I can
I would
relate.
say that, um, yeah, right. So the beauty of the healing modality that I work with now is it meets people where they're at and gives them the opportunity to be evolving in a space that is gentle, effective, and it's relevant for them at that time where they are. And I have a lot of different, clients at different stages of their lives. So, I have some people who are in their I have a client in their 90s, and I've got, clients who are just a couple of years old. And there's just like a whole range. And, some of the kiddos that I've worked with, their parents bring their kids to me to run healings for them. And, there occasionally will be a version of themselves from the future that steps in to receive the
Wow.
healing. And yeah, and then some of the people who are a little more further along, maybe on this so-called timeline, are looking at their lives and reflecting, and in that space of wanting to integrate everything that has passed on the linear timeline scale so that they can pass more kindly and gently through the next phase. At least that's what I see with their higher selves, what I've observed, to put it that way.
Sure.
So there's a whole broad range, and that's the beauty of this modality, or at least that's how I am able to work with
Yeah.
it, because it gives you the tools to be able to really level up your own presence in the world, to share your light, to be a light worker, and to become a catalyst for global change, which is really what we all want to be aiming towards. And
Beautiful.
even if that's global towards, I feel like that's the case. And being a global, a catalyst for global change doesn't necessarily mean you have to go out there and be some sort of powerhouse demonstrator, or, be standing on the lawn of the White House with a white, picket sign. Some people, yes, some people are going to these war-torn areas to do that kind of work, and that's very valuable, beautiful work. I have, uh, people that I know that are involved in that really, really deep, intense work all around the world. However, how we bring up our children
Yes, I
makes
was going to
massive,
say. Yes.
yes, how we relate to the person at the grocery store can have a
Yes.
massive impact. How we speak to just everyone in our environment, and how we treat people can have a massive impact. That's where global change starts, I feel, for a lot of us. It doesn't have to be, there are some that really feel called to go to a specific location. And in Transference Healing, we do speak about the different planetary grid lines, and how they, there are certain beings that are drawn to certain parts of the world where they will be working with the energies there and pulling in more light. And, maybe working with the grid or the planet or the land in that space. And then there are others where it's really just within their community, within their family unit. They're light workers just right there. Maybe they're, working within their kiddo's school, helping within I think it's called the PTA committee. I don't have kids, so I'm just kind of like going with some of the things I've heard, but that's
Yeah.
that's the idea. And somebody might want to teach yoga somewhere, and that's them shedding their light and bringing light into the communities, and becoming you just never know who you might be touching with your light.
Yes.
When you're
Yes.
standing in integrity, you're standing in your truth, you are really connected to the highest aspect of yourself with the best intention at all times. You never know who you might be inspiring, who you might be lifting up.
That is so beautiful. Thank you. Yes, I love that. So important, because I think often we think change has to be some huge um task, but it's really starts with these threads, unraveling the threads that have become tangled, and then starting to weave our lives back into alignment. And the ancestral threads, I was going to say, sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is just show up as a conscious mother, become authentic, and choose not to pass down the things that maybe you internalized or inherited. And I mean, think about the huge change that will eventually have if we all collectively did that. I mean, that would be enormous. If we had a next generation of securely attached children that were well resourced and loved. That would be huge. And sometimes we think change has to be immediate. It has to be now, but it takes time. And I think it takes this work of cultivating self-awareness and a spiritual practice and devotion to life. Yeah. So my next question, from your perspective, what is the most urgent challenge humanity might be facing in order to evolve consciously?
Yes, I really love this question. It speaks to so much of where we are right now, so much of what we're experiencing right now, as far as making that shift from the Piscean age into the Aquarian age. And I would say, from my perspective, that bridge between the two is going to be our greatest point of, I use the word tentatively power, but it is a power move, because the power move is getting into the heart. And that 4D bridge is all heart-based reality. It's heart-based connections. It's heart-based awareness. So it's the challenge right now, because I feel like, and I think people with AI technology being where it is right now, we are being coaxed into a space where we are becoming very cerebral, and we are becoming a little disconnected from the physical and from our connections with each other in physical reality. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It means we're more connected in other ways. Being able to be on video, and, that kind of started to really blossom during COVID, where everyone felt so connected, even though they weren't able to physically be present with each other. However, it's that remembrance of the importance of what our physical bodies need, which is the scent of each other, being able to actually be present in the nervous system energy of another human, physical touch, all of those kinds of things that are still important to our physical vessels as human beings. And so much of that, I feel, is starting to, some people are starting to realize that, but they're also, the people going through a process of maybe not finding that so important. And for me, it's that heart connection that is going to become more and more important for us moving forward. So in transference healing, in order to become multidimensional, which is obviously still having a foot in 3D if we have to, which is this physical, tangible reality, and being able to access other dimensions that are at a higher plane or higher level, so fifth dimensional, sixth dimensional, and onwards, we really need to have our hearts well functioning. And from my understanding, so much of the challenge that we have ancestrally, and also just within one lifetime of childhood conditioning, has caused us to shut down our hearts through the need to protect ourselves, to be kept safe, through fear. And so I have, a set of writings. I've kind of been releasing some stuff on Substack recently around that, around the bridge between fear and love being inner peace. And it's about coming to terms with the unresolved stuff, the unresolved, what I would call emotional debris within the heart chakra, within the heart space. That to me is the bridge between where we are now and eternity and infinity, and pretty much everything and anything we could possibly have access to out there is going to need to be filtered through a healthy, well-functioning heart. And transference healing, especially Alexis Cartwright, speaks about 3 chambers of the heart, the spiritual chambers of the heart. So there's 4 chambers of the heart physiologically, but in spiritual terms, there's 3 chambers of the heart that need to be well, fully functioning in order for us to really hold our higher selves and more to be our spiritual selves on earth, to really hold that kind of connection to our higher selves and embody it more. And so the first chamber of the heart is related to our physical well-being. If that's not functioning, and this is on a spiritual level, then our ability to actually live a contented, happy, healthy life is impinged. Then secondly, there's the need to develop unconditional love, which will also allow for us, this is the second chamber of the heart, accessing the gifts and skills that come from past and present and future, and embodying it all into the here and the now. So that could be psychic gifts, that's the all the clairs, and being able to access what we've already done and be able to pull in what is to come and be able to live it now, so that we become multidimensional. And then the third chamber of the heart is where people become like spiritual masters. And that's through this heart mastery. And as a spiritual master, you become an ascended master. You actually are able to really move into that space. And not very many people have managed to make it there. More and more are getting to that point. But there are certain levels of development that people need to go through with that in terms of the different energy bodies that they have, the subtle bodies. This is also the heart chakra. The heart chakra's got to be well functioning. And then the higher chakras come online, but in a healthy way, as opposed to, functioning but not being fed perhaps the right fuel, because there's a lot of detritus, left over from the pain and the suffering from previous lifetimes or present life that will continue to be the filter that people are experiencing the world through. And so the ethos of my own work is transformation through clarity of what's going on for heart-based empowerment. That's really my ethos with the work that I'm doing now and where I'm heading towards. It's this sense of, okay, we're gaining this clarity, we're becoming empowered, but the empowerment can, if it's perceived through a lens of victim perpetrator or pain or suffering, it can become violent. And that's something I've observed a lot. Empowerment sometimes, from what I've perceived, has been taken by people and they run in a direction where it becomes a sacred act of revenge or a sacred act of harming others. They become the perpetrator again, even though they've been victimized. And that to me is understandable. It does happen, and it's part of a process that some people need to go through. So for me, it's about the transformation that brings the clarity, that brings empowerment, that leads to heart-based empowerment. It's a sense of being in the heart and being empowered with it. And that's really what I'm gearing towards. That's the direction I'm taking people in, my clients. That's so important, I feel, moving forward as we go into this Aquarian age and we start functioning more multidimensionally.
Yeah, that feels so important. And it's so beautiful through these conversations I've been having. There are some really incredible threads that are resonating right through, and this heart-based energy is coming through really strongly. And it feels also like it's a shift away from the system that we live in now, this patriarchal system that's really set up. It's all mind-based, and we've severed the connection with our bodies and our hearts, in order to just function in this system. And so now, like moving from the heart and the conversations that I'm having, it's all heart-based. The call is just coming from within. I want to connect with this person, and that feels like a divinely guided emergence, the way sort of nature intends things to evolve and flourish. So it's going to be really interesting also for leaders to be dropping into the heart and moving from that space.
Yes. So part of what has drawn me to India now and to be spending time in India is the deep practice of bhakti, which is all devotion and it's all heart-based, unconditional love, and all the experiences that we have when we are present are all designed by spirit to open our hearts more. And sometimes that can look like challenges. Sometimes it can look like initiations. Sometimes it looks like doing service, supporting others who are in need. There are so many beautiful activities here, planting trees, connecting to nature, feeding people, which is one of my favorite things to do. Working with the kids, also wonderful to do, so rewarding, teaching them to read, having conversations with them in English, and just generally seeing people who are so kind and considerate and respectful towards each other. And granted, everyone has their moments and their days and their whatnot, but people here it's a beautiful space to be learning more about that heart-based reality, take that out into the world. And I really do feel like, my spiritual teacher, Amma, that's what she wants for us to do, is to take that love out into the world and that heart-based reality out into the world and into our communities.
So true. It brings me to the next reflection that keeps coming up, is that we've really have fallen into that Maya, the illusion, this dream that we are all separate. And now what is happening is this awakening of this understanding that we actually aren't, and we're so interconnected. And one of my practices, I studied biomimicry for a while, like studying the principles in nature. because I feel that, if we really wanted to learn how to be in coherence or live with one another, we could really ask nature. And it often, gets me thinking when, we're driving along and there are children on the side of the road that are hungry. And if you look at a beehive, it's not each to their own. It's, everybody is serving life, actually. And that's, if somebody else is not thriving, then we're all not thriving. And so needing to shift our consciousness into that kind of a mindset where actually we can't be abundant or free if somebody else is not. And so integrating this, knowing that we aren't all separate, that somebody else's thriving is my thriving, and how can we move into more coherence and start serving life and not the individual.
Beautiful. I love that. They
Yeah.
have a saying in India that goes, what you take care of takes care of you.
Yeah. It's so true. And I mean, these are also universal laws. What you put out is what comes back. And it's not about doing it for that purpose, because we're talking about unconditional love. But when you really understand these principles, then life is not, my life is not just mine, this persona, this person that is Romy, and this understanding that actually in the large game or the scheme of things, Romy doesn't exist. It's just the persona that I am wearing this in this storyline. But really, how can we move? How can we move together in coherence? You look at the beautiful murmuration of birds and how they sense each other, but they have a shared goal. It's really something that I think humanity needs to shift in that way, thinking about thriving in that way, together.
Together.
We are all in this together. So I just wanted to ask you two more questions. The first was, what questions or reflections would you invite anyone listening to explore after hearing your story?
What kind of world would I like to create? Because essentially, everyone is going to be having an individual experience of the world. That is the beauty of Maya, but also the cutting edge of it, in that our holographic reality will be very much determined on what's going on internally. I mean, can't get away from that. So what kind of world would I like to create? Let me go about building that within so that it is reflected without. That's really, I feel, the first question that I would suggest to people. What kind of world would I like to create? And that starts inward and then moves out. Second of all, I would say, where would I like all of us to be in 5 years from now? Not me. Where would I like to be in 5 years? Where would I like all of us to be in 5 years from now? And that's not necessarily a question that people would ask, but it goes along the lines of what you were just mentioning earlier. Where would I like all of us to be in 5 years' time? And that brings a very different color and flavor and texture to a vision that people can be collectively working towards, but in their own individual capacity. So giving them that sense of autonomy, sovereignty, and also visualizing a future for all that is peaceful, that is harmonious, that is well fed, that is well cared for, and that is balanced.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, it really reminds me of that, well, two things as you were speaking. First, what kind of world do we want to live in? To really understand that we are creators. We are drops in the ocean of that divine creatorship, that divine life force, and that we have the power to create our lives with all of life through our words and our actions in everyday, those tiny moments, the way we deal with things and the words we speak and the way we make others feel, those can have such a huge impact generatively in how we create our lives with others. And then also, I love that you really inviting that reflection of how do we create a world where we all thriving. And again, it reminds me of nature, because in nature, the most resilient ecosystems are the most diverse. So diversity is actually something that is so precious. To me, it feels like it's a part of the meaning of life. If the divine wanted to know itself through infinite ways, then we should really be celebrating that authenticity within each of ourselves, but also with one another. And then understanding that by creating a world where everybody thrives, if there's going to be a time where I'm going to need to assess, whether it's because I've just had a baby or I'm getting, to old age. And that's when, the whole can hold me and for others as well. And it's about creating these nets of support, these communities of support that support all of life.
Beautiful vision.
Yeah, I am also a manifesting generator. I got lots of Sagittarius and Aquarius in me, so that is my optimistic and idealistic self. And I guess I'm coming into that space of owning it. That's one of my fine purposes, is to hold that vision.
Beautiful.
And then I would love you to tell me, how can people learn more about your work? Where can they connect with you? How can they work with you? Tell us.
Yeah, I have a website that they can find me at, the thhealer.com. And there's all the information around the trainings, the healing trainings that I offer, as well as the retreat that I am offering, facilitating just very small, intimate retreats here in India. And people can find me on social media, Scarab the TH Healer. I can give you all the links to put below the video if you like.
I will. Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing all of your beautiful insights and your stories. That was such a beautiful conversation, and I'm so grateful. And I'm so grateful for my connection with you.
Likewise.
It's always been so
Inviting me.
special. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank
Thanks
you
so
so
much,
much.
Really appreciate the invite. I wish you well.
It's our mission to catalyze emergence through life-affirming dialogues, real connection, and wisdom circles, weaving futures that recognize this as a cultural format for dialogue, for healing, and for innovation. If you enjoy what we do, please like and subscribe to our channel. Join us on Instagram at r_emergence. And you can find us on our website, www.ouremergence.com. Hope to see you in Circle.